Good evening. I'm Tara Singer, and it is my pleasure and honor to serve as the President and Chief Executive Officer of Omicron Delta Kappa. If you've been initiated in the last 10 years, it is very likely that my name is on your membership certificate. Tonight, ODK is excited to have Ann Levine present this seminar. Ann is a 1994 initiate of the University of Miami Circle, and she served as its president when she was an undergraduate. After receiving her law degree from Miami, Ann worked as the Director of Student Services at the University of Denver's College of Law. Following that role, she worked as the Director of Admissions for Loyola in California. After 2 years in private practice, Ann started her own company, Law School Expert. In her career, Ann has helped numerous individuals learn and understand the challenges of law school admissions. She's written 2 best-selling books on the topic, and tonight, she is here to help us ODK members all better understand how to position oneself for acceptance into a school of law. Finally, tonight, when it is time to ask questions, we ask that you post them in the chat. My colleague, Tim Reed, will be monitoring the chat and facilitating the submission of questions. And welcome, and thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. A little distressing to hear it's been 30 years since I was initiated into ODK, but thanks for that. I'm very glad to be here with all of you. Just to give everyone a heads up on the format and what to expect, I'm going to speak for about 30 minutes on the different components of the law school application process and the timeline that you should consider following when applying to law school, and break down each of the tasks to be accomplished. And then all of the questions that you build up in the chat room, I'll answer at the end of the presentation, hopefully. So I will go ahead and get started. And for those of you who are curious, you can find out more about me. You can follow me at Law School Expert at Instagram and on TikTok. And my website is lawschoolexpert.com. My primary job is that I am a law school admission consultant, and I started this company in 2004. So I've been doing this for a long time. My sole job is helping people get into law school and presenting their stories effectively. And so I'm going to share with you today some of the strategies that I use in doing so, and hopefully it gives you a good indication of what you need to be thinking about as you approach this process. Also, some of you may be familiar, this is what my book looks like. This is the 5th edition of the book, The Law School Admission Game, Play Like an Expert. The 6th may come out this summer, but this is pretty up to date for those of you who are seriously considering applying. Law schools operate on something called rolling admissions. It's a little bit different from the college process. There is an advantage to applying in the fall versus the winter. So as you're looking forward to your law school admissions cycle, it's not so much like an undergrad where you're applying under an early action deadline or anything like that. It's more a question of you want to pace out your cycle so you are submitting applications in September, October, November in order to have the best chance of getting into the schools on your list. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Rolling admissions is the fact that the sooner you apply to law school, the higher your likelihood of attendance. Now, I want to make sure you don't take this too literally, because it's not a question of September 1 versus October 1. It's more a question of the fact that when you apply in September, October, that's when schools start to admit and they have more seats available. So even everything else being equal, your LSAT, your GPA, your accomplishments being equal, it's your chances of getting in and getting scholarship funding are better applying at that time than later. There are reasons to wait to apply to law school until later in the year. That might include wanting your December transcripts to help your GPA upward trend. And it might be that you need to take the LSAT again to have your best shot. And so those are reasons why it would be worth waiting for. Most law school applicants do not apply under an early decision binding contract. Law school is different from undergrad in that way, where it's a way to, in undergrad, it's a way to kind of skirt scary acceptance rates. But in law school, early decision has a lot more at stake. First of all, instead of 50,000 people applying to a college, you have 3 or 4 or 5,000 applying to law school. So most law students don't apply binding because there's just as I said, too much at stake. What that means is that you're saying you'll attend that school no matter where else you get in, no matter where else you get scholarships. And most law school applicants are pretty sensitive to the cost of law school, especially those who are already carrying loans from undergrad, or those who didn't, but their parents have said they're not also paying for graduate school. So the only reasons to apply binding early decision are if you are absolutely certain that you would go to a certain school no matter what. And the complication in this is that for people who are competitive at very top schools, you should know that schools like Harvard, Yale, Stanford do not offer early decision. So that's a good example of how early decision is not as prominently relied upon. Even if you do apply early decision, those deadlines don't even start until mid-November. And at some schools, they go all the way through the admission cycle. You can even apply binding to like Georgetown in March. So early decision is not as big a consideration applying to law school as it was for you for undergrad. The ideal time to apply to law school is between Labor Day and Halloween. I use the holidays as a point of reference because it's easiest to remember. Halloween through Christmas would be on time. And winter break to mid-January is okay. It's not the end of the world if that's what you need to do to work on applications during winter break. It's just not ideal. But anything after that is putting you at a disadvantage in the law school admission process because seats and scholarships have already been given away. So what do you need to think about now in order to hit this timeline for fall? So for those of you who want to start law school in fall of 2024, you'll be submitting applications about 6 months from now. So this is absolutely when you should be starting your LSAT prep if you have not already. So let me spend a moment talking about the role of standardized testing in law school admissions. It is not optional at this point. You do have to take a standardized test. There are some schools that will accept a GRE in lieu of an LSAT score, but I do not recommend using a GRE score for law school admissions for 2 reasons. One is that it is very hard to predict which schools you'll be competitive for. And the second is that you're less likely to be given scholarship funding. The LSAT is the test that statistically has shown law schools who will thrive at their school. It is also still the main thing that is relied upon for their rankings. And so that's going to be where I would put my focus. You want to plan in your head to take the LSAT more than once. You can take it 3 times during an admission cycle, and that is absolutely fine to do. The rumors of there being a stigma or scores being averaged are not correct. Schools will see all of the scores, but it's the highest that matters. You never want to take the test without being prepared. So the test is given on 10 dates a year, but really it's more than that because it's, for example, it's being given August 8th and 9th, or 13th and 14th, and you choose which test date. But starting with the August LSAT, you'll have a choice of whether to take it online or in person. So that's an interesting thing that we're adjusting to. You want to, if you're starting now with LSAT prep, you really want to plan to take the September LSAT to give yourself the whole summer to study. And then if you have to or want to retake the test in October or November, that's absolutely fine, especially the October date would not put you late in the cycle. But give yourself plenty of time. You should take a minimum of 8 to 10 time practice tests before your first LSAT that are in a range that you'd be happy scoring on the real thing. So does take a lot of prep, and there's very sophisticated LSAT prep options out there now. So if your first instinct is to look at the same big name company you might have used for SAT prep, please don't. Please consider very specialized online LSAT prep. It is affordable, it is accommodating, it is in the proper format that you'll actually be tested digitally. And AI has really helped this process by being able to give you questions that are the things you actually need to practice. So in my book, I mentioned a few companies like LSAT Lab is one of them. That's a very affordable subscription-based online digital LSAT prep. So you want to get started on those things now. You don't have to decide now exactly when you're taking the LSAT, but it's good to have an idea in your head. You need to be aware of when the registration deadlines are and the deadlines for accommodation requests. You can move your LSAT dates, but again, only 3 times per cycle. You should only take the LSAT if you've taken those 8 to 10 time practice tests that are in line with your hopes of what you can do. Excuse me. And you should be happy with your score range. So If you're not happy with your score range, it wouldn't get you where you want to be, or you think you can do better, or you haven't prepped sufficiently, you're not ready to take the test. Okay, hopefully that kills that. You're always better off applying later in the cycle if it means a higher LSAT score. For your application materials, you really want to give yourself 2 to 3 months to complete them. And that's really what you should be doing this summer. So asking for letters of rec is one of the first things you should consider doing. I'm going to mute for just a moment and be right back. Sorry about that. The two things with the longest lead time with your application materials are letters of recommendation and sending your transcripts to LSAC. You need to give your recommenders at least 2 weeks, but really 4 weeks. And likewise, you need a minimum of 2 letters, but you can have up to 4 for some schools. So you really want to give people a lot of time to do that for you. The best people to write letters of rec are undoubtedly people who've taught you and at a college or graduate school level. That's really the thing that law schools want to know. If you've worked in a professional capacity, then it would be appropriate to ask for an employment letter, but internship letters, family friend letters, coaching letters are really less helpful for the law school application process. The other thing you need to think ahead on is getting your transcripts to LSAC. This process can surprise people. You need to register for CIS through LSAC and send all of your transcripts to LSAC. And what that means is that if you attended a community college or took a college credit during a summer or during high school, all of those transcripts also have to be sent to LSAC. And they compute your GPA for the law schools in a way that includes all of those credits. So for example, if you transferred and your graduating GPA from your institution is a 3.8, but you had earlier credits that were 3.2 GPA community college, you don't get the 3.8 as your GPA. It all gets factored in. It's better to know that ahead of time. So go ahead and take care of that. When you submit each application, LSAC will send your letters of rec and your transcripts with that application for you. Your resume. So this sounds basic, and I think the inclination for some people is just send whatever resume they have that they've been working on with their career services office. But actually, the resume chapter of my book is one of the longest because it is one of the best ways for you to really share with the law schools how you've spent your time. It shouldn't just be the things that you think are relevant, like what you might put on a job resume. It should include your areas of passion and interest, your student organizations you've been involved with, and descriptions of that. The number of hours you've worked a week, even if it's at a job you don't think is relevant to law school, even if you were working at Starbucks or in retail, that all needs to be on your resume. It shows grit. It shows that you understand the value of a dollar. It shows you were working 15 hours a week while going to school, all of that. So give your resume a lot of attention. And I have a lot more details on how to do that in the book, and even on some of my free webinars and things and YouTube short videos. So I have a lot about that separately, but don't overlook your resume. It's also really good to do your resume because it's a good reminder of the things you've done. And once you see how you describe things on your resume, it frees up your personal statement to not say the exact same words and to not say, oh, I worked at this place and then I worked at this place. The law schools will already know that, and it gives you freedom with your personal statement, which is the next thing we'll discuss. You will write a personal statement for law school applications. It will be largely the same for every school, which may be a relief to those of you who still have Common App nightmares. It will be approximately 2 pages, double spaced in 11 or 12 point font. Those are the basics. What goes inside there after that is entirely up to you, but it should be authentic. It should show that you're a thinking person who is reflecting on experiences that have led you to apply to law school. You do not need to fall on a sword and state exactly what kind of law you hope to practice. You don't have to choose a major. It's just a question of showing that you've put thought into this decision, but the entire essay really doesn't have to go in that direction. It can be about qualities that you've developed or expressed that would apply to law school. It can be almost anything. When people say don't repeat your resume in your personal statement, That does not mean you can't talk about the things on your resume in your personal statement. That would be ludicrous. What it means is you don't want to say, at this job, I was responsible for. That's resume language. But it's absolutely appropriate to say, at this job, I was exposed to X and learned Y. This is all about being insightful and authentic about your experiences. The emphasis is not on being unique or on being entertaining. It is about using every word wisely, avoiding cliches, and expressing yourself authentically. So I've used that word a lot because credibility is really the number one thing that law schools are looking for in your application. To say, oh, I want to be an entertainment lawyer because I love the movies is not going to cut it. To say, I want to be an entertainment lawyer after working the last 3 summers for this entertainment law firm and blah, 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 that's credibility. Okay. And entertainment law is just one example, but you get a lot of people who were athletes and therefore wants to do sports law. The link is too tenuous. Or you get people who, my grandparents were immigrants, therefore I want to do immigration law. It's too tenuous. The personal statement needs to be about you and needs to make a case for your goals, your next step, your decisions by explaining things you've done in the past, things you've learned, things you've explored. The personal statement should really focus on things you've endeavored to do rather than things that have happened to you. If you're writing about something that has happened to you, it's probably more likely to be your diversity statement. Diversity statement is not for everyone, but it is for people who either identify as a member of a marginalized population, socioeconomic differences. It could be any number of things. It could be military experience if it's not already covered elsewhere. But this is your chance to show that you bring a diverse perspective to the law school, or diverse experiences, or you've overcome a tremendous obstacle. These might range from being the victim of a crime to being first generation in your family to go to college and what you had to do to make that happen for yourself. It could be any spectrum of things. But if you write the diversity statement and it's more about your parents than about you, if it's more about your best friend than about you, if it's more about someone random you met than it's about you, then you should not write a diversity statement. It really needs to be your story, and it's not for everyone. More is not better. Quality is better, and it goes back to your credibility. What you'll be tested on in law school and as a lawyer is your ability to review facts and choose which facts help you make an argument. That is what you're doing in your law school application. So if you choose facts that don't help you make an argument, if you choose facts that aren't relevant, that fail to establish your credibility, then you're not going in the right direction with your application. So really think about that with everything that you choose to share. Another aspect of your application materials that you may want to consider doing or may have to consider doing is an addendum. There are 2 types. One is something you're required to tell the law schools in response to a question on their application. For example, something called a character and fitness addendum that asks, have you ever been accused of plagiarism? Have you ever been convicted of a crime? Have you ever been disciplined by any academic institution or professional capacity? Those are things you have to be candid about in your applications, or it could come back to bite you when you try to become a member of a bar as an attorney. So a very common one, for example, is getting caught with alcohol in the dorm. You would have to say on an addendum, during my sophomore year of college, I was written up for having an open container in my dorm room when I was only 20 years old. I was given a written warning. I wrote an essay apologizing for my conduct, the end, something like that. Very straightforward explanation. There's also a type of addendum you might choose to write to provide context to other facts in your application. So for example, if you look at your transcripts and you had 1 year or 1 semester that was not in line with your other academic performance and it brought down your GPA, you might have an addendum to explain what was going on during that year. You might say, during that time, I was commuting home 3 hours every weekend because my mother was sick and she needed my help taking care of my younger siblings. Or you might say you had a medical difficulty that semester and or you might have changed majors into a major that wasn't the best fit for you. So that's your chance to kind of make your case for why your GPA or something else about your background is not indicative of your abilities. So here's just a list of the kinds of addenda there could be. So for example, if you took a leave of absence during school, that's something you would need to write an addendum about. Many schools also have optional statements with their applications, but you won't necessarily know what they are until applications are released. So that's something you wouldn't be able to really start working on until September. Also, you need to know where you're going to decide to apply in order to know whether they're optional essays. The other pieces of the application will apply to every law school pretty much, but you need your LSAT score to choose schools. You don't know which sandbox you're playing in until you see your LSAT score. If you didn't already know, every law school publishes what's called an ABA 509 report. And that will show all the data that you need to make a good decision about where you fit in with that school's incoming class. It'll show 25th and 75th percentiles, et cetera. So if you are a 25th percentile GPA for that school, but a 75th percentile LSAT for that school or vice versa, then that's probably a good school for you to apply to. If both of yours are at the 75th, that's probably what we call a safety school. If both of yours are at the 25th, that's what we call a reach school. If you're below the 25th on any of those, it's probably a pretty big reach, especially if you're significantly below. It's not like college. You don't need to visit schools beforehand. You can save that till you see where you're admitted. Things that are important to consider. There are 4 aspects to your decision about where to apply and where to attend law school. One is reputation. Some people use rankings as the word for that, but I use reputation. Location. Some people want to go to law school in the area where they hope to practice because that's where they will make their connections and get their internships. Cost of law school. I've been counseling law school applicants for 19 years. And before that, I worked for different law schools. Before that, I was in law school. So what I would say is that I've seen how at the beginning of an admission cycle, like in April, May, June, people think they don't care what law school costs. They only care to get into an impressive school. And then they get closer to actually signing on the dotted line and they see what the loans look like and they change their tune. And that's when students are really happy to have the choice to go to schools where they're offered scholarships. So when you're coming up with your schools list, please cast a wide net that would include reach schools, but also schools where you'd be competitive for scholarships. And the last would be environment or community. This is more important to some than others. These 4 things that are important in choosing a law school will rate differently with each of you. Some people, reputation is most important. Some people, cost is most important. Some people, location is most important. And for some, the environment or community is most important. That might include political leaning of a campus. It might include the environment of a college campus versus a college town versus a big city. It might include a preference for a religious aspect of the education, whatever that means for you. But those are basically the 4 things to really consider when you're choosing law schools. So some takeaways about the process as we pull this together, and then I move on to any questions, is the main part of the process of applying to law school is basically now through October. That can be December. It's okay, but let's call it now through October. If your timeline ends up shifting because you need to take the LSAT again, it's totally okay. But sitting here today, I'd create a calendar for yourself where this was how it was going to apply in the fall. You get your LSAT study plan underway now. You start sending in all your transcripts for those of you who are still in college as soon as the semester's over. For those of you who've already graduated, you can go ahead and do that. Your graduate GPA does not count as an objective factor in the application, but you still have to send those transcripts if you're a graduate student. You want to ask for your letters of recommendation. You want to spend the summer really working on LSAT prep and applications. It does not need to be a full-time effort, but it does need to be measured out carefully so that you don't leave it all for the end and submit shoddy work or fail to give LSAT the attention it deserves. Sorry about the dog. I was waiting for that. And then the best time to apply would be September, October. Applications start to come out at the end of, at the beginning of September. My golden retriever. So that is the end of the formal presentation I'll be giving. Here you can see the link to my website. I offer a series of webinars that those of you who are participating today will have access to I at a special rate. And I also have a lot of content available on my social media channels as well at Law School Expert. So Tim, how are we doing with questions? I'm sure you've been working hard compiling them.
We do have some questions from some folks. Let me throw out the first one. About 3 months before taking the LSAT, what's the average number of hours most students put in to get a good score? That was from Alexa.
It's a great question. I think it's different for everyone. We all learn differently. I would say if you know you're someone who struggles with standardized tests or feels like they have testing anxiety or does actually have testing anxiety, give yourself more time. And if you're someone who you know is kind of naturally brilliant with standardized tests, you kind of rock the SAT, ACT, no problem, then you can use that information too. But I would say at least start with 4 to 6 hours a week and see how that goes for you. Using these online programs, it's not so structured, like you must do this many hours a week in front of the, sitting in the classroom, what have you, but just kind of monitor your process. It's better to get started a little bit than to not get started at all. Like an exercise plan, right? You might not have time to start training for a marathon and work out 2 hours a day, but you could start with just 10 or 15 minutes a day and you will be better off and better working toward your goals.
Great. A follow-up sort of to that one. What are some impressive experiences in undergrad that applicants should highlight for law schools?
Great. Now, I want to preface this because I'm a lawyer and the answer to everything is it depends, but everyone's different. There's no lockstep thing to follow, but some typical things that law schools find impressive include writing a thesis. That's an academic experience that's impressive, or being a research assistant for a faculty member in an area that is of interest to you. Exploring your own passions, whatever they may be, whether you do that extracurricularly through travel experiences or volunteer experiences. Really diving deep into the things you do rather than collecting a laundry list of things you do. They don't have to be law related, because really lawyers are interdisciplinary beings. So that's why we don't major in law as an undergrad. Here we bring other expertise and other academic knowledge to our law degree. And that's important in college as well. So I would say seek out things you care about, explore things you're actually passionate about, and then explore them deeply. And while that might sound vague, it's really what law schools are looking for, that you're an intellectually engaged human.
So let me follow up, because Tegan asked, as someone who may end up taking a gap year between my undergraduate degree and my law school start, how do I best position myself? It kind of ties into that. What kind of, would you suggest a law internship? What kind of experience, part-time job?
Well, Tegan, you'll like this, because taking a gap year, you can do whatever the heck you want to do and just do something. And the reason I say that is by the time you would apply to law school in September, you won't have anything that you'll have done yet. So it really doesn't matter. You want to show you're doing something and not just sitting home doing nothing, but it really doesn't matter what that thing is. You're not suddenly a non-traditional applicant because you'll have 3 extra months after college before applying. Does that make sense? So let me say this another way. Taking a gap year has a lot of benefits in that you get your whole senior year grades to count. You have more time to study for the LSAT. It's better for you personally, all good, valid things. But what it doesn't do is add a tremendous amount. For example, people ask me all the time, should I get a 1-year master's degree? Should I be a paralegal? Neither of those things are really going to matter very much. As long as you are keeping busy doing something productive, it's sufficient, because you just won't be doing whatever you're doing long enough for it to make a big difference in your application. It's also very difficult to find paralegal work if you're not doing a 2-year commitment. So most people who are just taking 1 gap year don't do that.
Great, thanks. Couple of questions back to sort of what you need. Do AP credits factor into GPA in transcripts?
Grades for them. You did not get grades for the AP classes. They don't factor in.
Okay. And then you mentioned letters of recommendation. How important are they?
Well, you want them to be as strong as possible, because a mediocre letter of recommendation is actually a bad letter of recommendation, right? Because you're trying to find people who can speak on your behalf to why you will be a brilliant law student and attorney. And so if people can't do that enthusiastically, it does bring down the quality of your application. If you haven't yet started to really get to know your professors, if you feel like you were stuck on Zoom for most of college, do what you have to do to go to office hours now. For those of you who are still in college, really cultivate those relationships so that those letters can be as strong as possible.
I'm going to follow up on that as somebody who has literally written hundreds of recommendation letters in my academic career before I started with ODK. Knowing the person and having the person in my office or working with them always made it much easier for me to write a strong letter of recommendation. So absolutely get to know the people. That'll be my 2 cents for the evening. We got a bunch of questions coming in here, Ann, so let me throw some out here. First, this is sort of a personal question. What was your major as an undergrad? This person's a history major, and I think people questioned that.
Well, you're talking to another history major.
There you go.
I actually double majored in communications and history, minored in art history. I don't know if it was ever official. I actually was just having this conversation with my daughter who's choosing her college major right now. And she's so head set on business because like, that's like practical. And I actually think it's completely impractical, but I won't get on a tangent. And I said to her, you know, the best classes I took in college that prepared me for law school were actually art history, because they show a slide, you look at that, and based on what you've learned and facts you know, you apply the cues and clues of the piece of art to figure out who you think wrote it, what time period it was in, what country it was in, all of these things. It's a lot of deductive reasoning and writing and argumentation. But here's the thing, really any major is fine. But if you do well in a difficult major, it's fantastic. That's the best thing you can do. Pick a difficult major, whether it's economics or biology or classics or philosophy. Pick something difficult, do well in it. That's the secret sauce right there. But there's no preference for one major or another. In law school, you'll have STEM majors and music majors and everything. So I'm a firm believer in if you do what you care about, you will excel. If you do something you don't care about, you will not excel. Always do the thing where you can excel.
Right. I have a question about a non-traditional student, 5+ years of post-undergrad work experience. Anything unique we should consider or demonstrate to make their application more valuable?
Yes, I would say for you, you're probably unlikely to have academic letters, and that's absolutely fine. You'll want professional-based letters. That can be tricky depending on your employment situation. You can go to former supervisors, managers, employers. Your resume will be important, showing why you want to make the career change you're making, how the career you've experienced in the past leads you here today is all good stuff. So whether it's military experience or consulting experience or teaching experience, whatever you've been doing, people go to law school from every kind of background. I had a conductor I worked with last year. I mean, doctors, police officers. So all of that is good. If your work experience has been kind of like, how would my daughter say it? Mid, is that the word? Like kind of meh, like it's like you've been working, but not anything like super sophisticated or not anything super challenging or intellectually engaging. It gets a little harder to make a case for how that makes you stronger. But what it can do is make a case for how you've changed since college. If you're trying to show growth and maturity since college, if your college record is unimpressive. So it's such a nuanced question, that you're asking, and I just don't know enough to give specifics, but I would say that on the whole, if you have a high level work experience and strong academic credentials, you have a higher likelihood of getting into Harvard than someone who's still in college.
That's great. A student is asking, what is the law school experience for like diverse students? For example, I have a physical disability. So, how is that up to the law school? What is that like?
So I may not be fully qualified to answer this because my expertise is on the getting in, and I'm not, I like to stay in my lane. But usually what I advise my applicants with disabilities to do is once they're admitted to a school, to meet with the disability services coordinator at that law school. And before you commit to that school, make sure you feel you have someone who will be responsive to your needs. The law schools will not know if you've had accommodations in the past on the LSAT or academically unless you tell them. It's not something you have to disclose. So depending on the nature of your disability, you might choose to hold that back. But the best way to see how responsive a law school will be in terms of granting the accommodations you need is to ask them that. But I don't want you to do it till you've already been admitted.
And I'm going to jump. There's another one that's sort of similar. This person said, I had a medical problem arise during my first LSAT attempt, couldn't finish the test, canceled my score. Does that cancellation look bad or work against me during the application process?
Cancellation for whatever the reasons, no big deal. Please don't explain it in your application because no one cares. No one cares. Okay, just move on. Take your next 2 scores. It's totally fine. Don't overthink it.
And then this one, with the high flex format being offered, what are your thoughts on in-person versus online LSAT?
It's a very personal decision. Some people don't have a place to take the test that's quiet. Some people prefer the in-person test experience. It's really personal preference, honestly. We haven't worked, students haven't used the new proctoring systems yet. So I don't have enough information to really tell you one's better than the other. I think it really just comes down to personal preference.
Okay. Wow, there's a lot of questions coming in, so I'm trying to
Got like
field
4 minutes.
these.
Yeah, go ahead.
Here's one. What's the general, this is about financial aid. What is the general thing to do when looking for financial aid, but still being dependent, not qualifying for need-based?
Again, it's outside my area of expertise. I'm not a financial aid expert, but you'll apply, you'll submit your FAFSA to law schools in January, but it's not something I'm qualified to answer.
And what about engaging with professors or admissions counselors at the law schools you're interested in prior to applying? Is there any benefit to doing that?
I would absolutely reach out to the law schools if you're visiting or have a reason for doing so. I would attend webinars the admissions puts on, what have you, but I would not start stalking professors unless you have a very specific reason. I mean, I really wouldn't do that. That will not be appreciated. Generally, there might be a few exceptions if you have a personal connection to a faculty member because you've done research with a colleague or something, but in general, no, please don't start stalking law schools. Demonstrated interest before you apply is really unimportant.
Let's see. I'm going to try and jump back up here. Any advice for student athletes? A really general question.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to be a student athlete. It's a great thing in your application. One of my children is a 2-sport student athlete. I think it's an awesome thing. You may or may not want a letter from your coach, depending. I would say just be careful about making everything in your application about the sport. And I definitely don't want an injured athlete overcoming injury story in the personal statement. It's cliche.
Okay. Let me see. I'm trying to jump back through these.
It helps maybe if there's some that are really universal questions that a lot
Yeah,
of
that's what I'm trying to find, some that are sort of.
By the way, Tim, any that we don't get to now, if you send me the list later, I will answer them on like TikTok and Instagram to the extent that I can. So don't feel pressure to get through all of them. I want to answer questions people are asking. So I can always do that through social media.
Sure. This one's, I'm going to generalize this one because this person's asking about a specific major and then pursuing a master's. I think you've already said this, but is a specific major and then a specific master's, does that influence law school outcomes, acceptance rates? Do majors and previous degrees really matter?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I mean,
so I'll write it specifically as this person says, as a crime scene investigation major, soon to be pursuing my master's in law enforcement intelligence, how will this influence my law school outcomes and chances of acceptance?
Well, it doesn't. Your LSAT GPAs influence your chances of outcomes and acceptance, but your experience in this very specific field that is law related adds to your application as what we call a soft factor. So if you have a chance of getting into a school based on your numbers, these are the kinds of things that law schools will find impressive because you have such a focused interest in something law related in those experiences. But that alone doesn't tell me where your chances of acceptance.
Okay. What about getting waitlisted? How do you get off waitlisted? What's the process?
Law schools will pick people off the wait list who fit what they are missing from their current class as they're trying to balance it. So for example, if they have no one yet from North Dakota and you're the person from North Dakota who's on the wait list, but in addition to that, they have to know you're going to say yes. They don't want to make 10 calls to fill one seat. They don't want to mess up their yield rates to fill one seat. So letting them know you're a sure thing is the number one thing you can do.
And what about undergraduate institution? Does the undergraduate institution you're from matter? Can it help? Can it hurt you?
Yes, yes, and yes. It can. Part of what you're being evaluated on academically is the rigor of your undergraduate experience. So for example, a 3.9 at the University of Florida, sorry to pick on Florida, is not the same as a 3.9 at Dartmouth. It's not the same. Even if the majors are the same, it's not the same because you're competing again in a whole different ballpark of peers. So excelling wherever you are is important, but even more important to be at the top if you go to a school that's less academically prestigious. Okay. Your major is part of that as well. But at the same time, you know, Harvard's not going to take only students from Harvard. They want a mix. And I only use Harvard as an example, not because I think going to Harvard's the end all be all, but yes, it does show something about the academic rigor of your institution, how you performed against those peers. Let's do one more question because I do have a hard stop. So
Okay. So let me throw this. If you have no research experience, will that hurt your application? What would you recommend?
no one has everything. No one has research assistantships and thesis and a 4.0 and is president of student government and 6 law internships and is an underrepresented minority. No one hits every box in life. So you don't need to either. Emphasize what your strengths are. If you're interested in doing research, if that's something you would like to do to fortify your own bank of skills, then reach out to a professor, reach out to someone and look for those opportunities to fill your basket of experiences, but don't feel that it's an absolute necessity in applying to law school to have that. Okay. I will absolutely make every effort to answer all of the questions I didn't get to when Tim sends them to me. If you follow me at Law School Expert at TikTok and Instagram, I try to answer those there. I enjoy doing so. And if you have specific questions about your situation, my full-time job is I'm a law school admission consultant. Feel free to reach out to me. I have a contact form on the website. But otherwise, thank you.
Well, great. I don't know if Tara's going to jump back on, but I want to tell Ann, thank you so very much for doing this for us tonight. This has been great. Thanks to all of our ODK members who were here and who asked great questions. And as I said, I will make sure I get those questions to Ann. We will post this on the ODK YouTube channel and we'll send it to Ann and she can post it on her YouTube channel and in social media. So thank you. And if you think these kind of seminars are worthwhile for ODK to continue to pursue, please shoot me an email, send me